xAPI Gnome, and then we have B, Betts, and Mr. Dobinson. So go ahead and talk things up on social. We're glad you're here. Welcome to our 7th web session of the semester. That means that we are officially past the midway point of the fall 2020 cohort, which is it went by really, really fast. It's going fast. Today, we're talking all about the learning ecosystem and the role of an xAPI LXP. We'll have a presentation by Dr. Ben Betts, and then we'll have a case study from Peter Dobinson, who's going to talk us through that ecosystem in the xAPI LXP. Right now, we have 849 people registered for cohort. That is 13 more than we had last week. So that's really exciting, and cohort is obviously still growing. It's never too late for folks to join cohort, so you might experience growth in your teams. You might have folks looking for projects to work on. We just want to remind you that you can still always welcome everyone to those teams. Now is also a good time if you are the presenter for your team today and you are giving that status update. If you can let us know that in the chat. So just let us know which team you're presenting on and what in your name, and we'll be able to make sure that you're ready for that. Behind the mics today, we have myself. I'm Jess Jackson. I'm the host of the xAPI cohort for this semester. We also have Leanne G behind the scenes and Jamie Washington, who are producing. If you experience any technical issues or you're not able to hear or anything like that, they're going to be the ones that are able to help you work through some of those technical issues. Again, like we said, we are officially at week 7 of the xAPI learning cohort. We have gone through how to send data, what xAPI was, sending better data, and now we're moving into the part of cohort where we're actually going to start seeing some case studies from the industry. So today will be our first case study, and it'll be really exciting to hear what Peter is going to share with us today. With that, I'm going to pass this over to Dr. Ben Betts, who's the Chief Product Officer for Learning Pool. So it's going to talk about the xAPI ecosystems and the new LXP.
Thanks, Jess. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you great.
You get like, you're so on my Christmas card list for calling me doctor. Like, that never happens. Like, I'm not even the right sort of doctor. I'm not even a useful doctor. Pandemic, I'm the least useful doctor there's ever been. Doctor of e-learning. No one ever needs one of those on an airplane, I tell you what. Hi, everybody. Glad to be here and glad to see the cohort going strong. I hope you're all being very successful with your projects and things like that. As Jess mentioned kindly, I'm Ben. I'm the Chief Product Officer of a company called Learning Pool. I'll tell you a little bit about Learning Pool in a mo and what we do, but just setting the scene for what I'd like to just talk to you about briefly today. Hopefully don't take too much of your time. I want to talk to you a little bit about the sort of philosophy that we're talking about the learning technology ecosystem with now at Learning Pool, and this is the sort of thing that's getting more traction in terms of how organizations think about the different layers that exist in the technology space when it comes to learning. We'll touch on the LXP, the Learning Experience Platform, briefly, and then I'll show you a couple of examples in theory of how we're starting to push the use of data sort of beyond the dashboard a little bit. So you're not going to get any dashboards or reports from me. Where I'm going to go towards is more about automation and hooking systems together and the potential of what that is. And I'll finish on an idea called the Learning Analytics Maturity Model that we would very much value your input to. So when I talk about learning in layers and the ecosystem in layers, this is the sort of philosophy that we've come to at Learning Pool, is that most modern learning ecosystems are made up of interconnected layers. And I saw a slide from Josh Burson earlier today, said the average number of learning technology tools that an organization has today is 23. So there's 23 different bits of kit in any given organization when it comes to learning and development. And so you think about that in terms of the interconnectivity that's there. People value the idea of things like a single sign-on to make the front-end experience seamless. But there probably isn't enough value given to making that experience seamless on the back end, to mean that if I do something in system A, system B reflects it, that there's a system of record that plugs together. That is really what we're getting at when we talk about an ecosystem in layers. Some of those 23 tools are going to be in the experience layer. Now, that might be an LXP, it might be an LMS, it could be in Microsoft Teams, it could be in Zoom, it could be wherever. But there's going to be places where folks get to access content and other resources, I should say. Then we've got that content layer where I might be presenting e-learning in a traditional sense. It could be videos, it could be stuff from a third-party content marketplace or a content host like a LinkedIn Learning or something else like that. And finally, I've got the data layer where I'm going to aggregate data from all of those different experiences, all of those different content layers, and try and make sense of it. And then hopefully try and hook it back around. So this is what my company Learning Pool does. We have a variety of different platforms and software technologies that play in each of these spaces. So Stream is our learning experience platform. I'll talk a bit about that in a moment. We make content both off the shelf and custom. We are behind an authoring tool called the Adapt Builder, which is based on an open source framework called Adapt. And then we make tools like Learning Locker. Learning Locker you might have come across in the learning record store space. So Learning Locker is our LRS, and it is also the home of where we do analysis and where we start triggering automation. Although I'll talk to you a little bit about Waves today, which is a plugin, works alongside Learning Locker to do some of that automation. So whilst we do the whole ecosystem at Learning Pool, we're very used to plugging into lots of different places. And so it tends to be that the LXP is kind of the front door to all of that. So when we're talking about a learning experience platform, we're talking mostly of a tool of discovery, but that discovery could be content that's from a third-party marketplace like a LinkedIn Learning. It could be from a wide range of catalogs you subscribe or you built. It could be programs that are mandatory, assigned, prescriptive learning, everything being sourced here. Sometimes it's made within this platform, sometimes it's made in an LMS and then linked to from here. The idea is that everything you do here is, fundamentally spitting out xAPI, putting it back through that system, and then being able to start to use that data as a trigger to say what else people might like. So I'll come on to how that works in the three-layer architecture as we go, but this is where we go. I'm monitoring the chat as we go. Joanne, so yeah, adaptlearning.org. Adapt is the framework. It is an open source framework for content authoring. Really powerful, spits out xAPI really well, and does some really cool things. So for example, Adapt is very good at deep scrolling pages. And so the idea here is that if I've got a piece somewhere in that page, then that block specifically can be addressed and can also be spitting out xAPI. We do cool things in the LXP and Adapt, which means that you can do things like deep search your content. So I'll get minorly technical for a moment. All of the content within an Adapt piece of e-learning is stored in JSON, a bit like the xAPI itself. And that means that we can search it and we can address it. So anytime that we're trying to think about, well, I want to search for this piece of content in an LXP, if it's in Adapt, we can get you exactly to that bit. So it's really, really cool framework for not only spitting out xAPI, but making good use of it and taking people directly to the right sort of place that they want. So we're big fans. A number of organizations were in the creation of Adapt, and we were one of those, and we have our own authoring tool around it. Do put any questions you have for me in the side. I'll go through them. So learning experience platform, front door to learning, and kind of tops off this three-layer architecture where I could have content coming from many different places. That content and my learning experience platform, we're putting data in, and then my learning experience platform is looking to react, is looking to say, well, look, if this rule set exists, if somebody's looking at this and this and this, then maybe we start to make a recommendation for this. This is where it all starts to come together in the LXP. Let me show you a more sort of concrete example of that. So I talked a bit about the ecosystem and wanting to move beyond the dashboard. Now, reporting and analyzing is still fundamental to what we're going to use xAPI for. So I don't want you to think like I don't care for that or something. That's huge and can give significant returns. But where I think we start to really add business value is when we go beyond describing and analyzing and into predicting and prescribing and saying that actually we can take action here. So we have this little tool called Waves, which is sort of signified in the middle here. There's kind of a bit of an if this, then that for xAPI. So when we get data coming into the learning record store, as long as it's in xAPI format, doesn't matter where it's come from, we can use that as a trigger to make something else happen. So that could be very straightforward. When somebody registers, send them this email. Or it could be more complex, where we're saying, look, actually, I want to get into the result of what came in this statement. And if the result is between this and this, then do this. If it's between this and that, then do that. And you start to be able to build in things here that start to say, okay, well, now we're starting to go down these sort of little different pathways. And eventually you can start to put some metadata around this as well and start to say, well, somebody who does this and this, they go down pathway A, that's someone who is struggling. So let's make an attribute about that person having a bit of difficulty. And maybe that attribute creation, saying that if they meet this, this, and this criteria, this person is struggling. That triggers a bunch of stuff in the LXP to say, well, look, for folks who are struggling, here's some revision topics. For folks who are really nailing it, then maybe we're going to give them some stretch topics and do something else there. So it can be the summation of going down these paths that leads to an attribute of some sort that identifies a particular trait or skill or behavior. And you can use that to trigger new content and new playlists back in something like the LXP. So this is getting cool. This is getting to a point of actually doing something different because we saw that the data was coming in. And we have some nice little examples here. So this is one of my favorite ones, a kind of Internet of Things example. So imagine this, and this is a real use case. So we have a fast food kind of retail outlet in North America who wants to trigger kind of just-in-time remediation learning based on what's going on in its bakery. And so at this point, we have the opportunity to sort of have a gold standard, as we'd say, of baked products. So somebody is using the ovens, putting out a new batch of croissant, whatever you want to call it. And then somebody else is going around with a mobile device and saying whether or not those baked goods match up to the standard. Now, the oven's been logged into, so we know who does that. And they set out a little Internet of Things thing that's going to ping my LOS and tell me when they've been baked. And I also know from the mobile device whether or not the latest batch was up to scratch. Now, that's a manual thing. Somebody's going around, the shift manager's going around and saying, croissant's great, Danish is awful at that point. So with those records in the LRS, we start to be able to pull this together and say, okay, Johnny was using the oven, croissants are awful, what are we going to do? You start to be able to think, okay, well, let's ping something to them. Now, it could be as simple as a text. It says, hey, go here, do this. It could be as complex as a piece of e-learning, something to be enrolled on next time to go. And you start going down this chain, the chain that I showed you on the page before. So you sort of say, okay, it's going down this no chain. Oh, this isn't great stuff. Happens again, then we get to take a slightly different piece of action. So maybe we send something different in the learning states. Maybe we email the manager as well, because actually we need to escalate this at this point. And you can start to build this up to start to say, okay, well, if this happens, then do this. And I'm sure some of you will think about this in terms of your projects and thinking that actually, I know that this could happen. Wouldn't it be amazing if I could be reactive and actually do something about that in that sort of routine? So instead of waiting just to say, oh, well, this guy sucks at the old croissants, maybe we could do something to bring him back on track before that. I think that's kind of a cool little example. I can get more complex as we go on in terms of where we're going and where we take this with the LXP. This is quite high level. I've got another slide just after this will come in here. But the idea of a learning experience platform is that it's a hub for both content and skills. So here's our range of content that we curate across my organization. And probably also here's a skills framework of some sort. Here's where we've got all of the skills that people need in order to do these different job roles or do these different things. And we start to map that in the LXP to say, look, if you want to be good at job role A, you need skill XYZ, and skill XYZ is similar to this content. So if you take that and you put somebody into a role, you're able to say, well, look, somebody who's becoming the croissant maker needs to do X and Y and Z. At that point, we start to trigger those automatic content assignments, and that can be pushed out to somebody. Now, it doesn't have to be pushed out to them on the LXP itself. Really clever thing with these sorts of platforms is we're getting better and better at pushing it into the workflow. Now, that could mean MS Teams. Not a lot of folks in the bakery are using MS Teams, though. It could mean a text to a phone. That's perfectly plausible as well. It could mean putting it in with an actual integrated piece of software that somebody does their day job. I'll show you an example of that next. And at that point, wherever that training is being completed, whether they're on the LXP, whether they're doing it through Teams, whether they're doing it from somewhere else, it doesn't really matter because we're going to get the xAPI data back from that, be it adapt content or some other action. We're starting to get records going into the LRS of where folks launch and do more stuff At that point, we see progress being updated. People are making progress towards this skill, and we can update what to do next. Let me give you this one for an actual sort of, this is a kind of simplified but real life version of a very large retailer doing this for real. So somebody logs into work in the morning. This is a kind of call center type environment, imagine that. And what they have to do is they have to log into their desktop application, and that gives them cases that they need to work on as they're going through the day. So today you need to do X, then you need to do Y, then you need to do Z. You have your whole day planned out for you by this kind of enterprise resource planning system. What they've managed to do is inject moments of training into that. So the first 3 tasks might be the first 3 things you need to do, the first 3 calls to handle or something like that. But then the next task might be training. And this is where we start to inject into the flow. So they click next and you get served a piece of learning content. You might get booted out to the LXP if it's something bigger and you need to do 2 or 3. It might link directly to the content, directly to that piece of content to get it through there. It's always mediated by the LXP because the LXP is what knows what you're assigned to and who you are and who's been assigned and enrolled to what. So even if you're launching it, it could be a pass straight through. Stream holds some content, but it doesn't hold much because most of the content is actually in another third-party system that's a big content management system. That's where most of the learning content is. Equally, they have assessments in another system that are out there. So it could be that what you've been told to do, what you've been assigned to do next is an assessment or a piece of content. Data is going from those assessments and content management systems into the learning locker, into the learning record store. And then we're going out to what we call the rules engine. Now, this is proprietary for these guys. These guys have built that bit I talked about of what skills go to what roles. They've built a database that does that. But we're updating the progression and any certification that happens as they go through these things. So if you pass the assessment, maybe you achieve the certification, we say, look, those skills are fulfilled. What's next? And really cleverly, then the rules engine is spitting it back out to their own desktop application and saying, well, look, if you've done this, then you need to do that. Keep going through and updating those assignments, creating new assignments, and serving them up in a desktop application. So I say, look, this is simplified, even if it is complex on the screen. But this stuff's real. People are doing this at the moment, and it has a transformative effect in terms of how we think about learning being put right in front of someone at the right point at the right time, and how we take data from many systems, not just a learning experience platform, but from a content system, from an assessment system, from a rules engine, from HR data, and put that into the mix. 3 of the top 5 US employers in the USA right now are using Learning Locker and doing something like this. They're not all this advanced, but everyone's kind of going this way, and it's pretty interesting at that point. I'm just going to come back and check out some of the chat, if I may. I've got just one more slide on the other side of this. So Matt, great example of IoT. That's cool. David, interesting that you have an application that monitors xAPI statements in LMS in real time, send out emails. Yeah, so a fundamental function of Learning Locker is the idea of statement forwards. So you create a statement forward to look for any criteria, and as soon as it sees that statement, it's going to pass something out. Now, Waves does that for you. You don't actually go and set up the statement forward in Learning Locker. Waves plugs directly into it. You use just a WYSIWYG interface to say, hey, when somebody does X or Y, tell me about it. And it's looking that out. So, but what it's actually doing behind the scenes is it's using an API to go and set that up in Learning Locker. So you have a statement forward. As soon as we see this statement, ping it here. And it's seamless and incredibly fast. How would the other know which actor was using it? They log in, same way as a point of sale system or something like that. They log into these things these days. Well, apparently these guys do, which is crazy. So David, so LXPs can apply custom skill paths more effectively than LMS? Yeah, no, I mean, some LMSs are real complex here. So, I don't want to underpin what an LMS can do. I think you'll find that there's kind of convergence. So the LMS tended to be quite top down that said, these roles do this thing. The LXP tends to be more emergent. So people who are in this role tend to do these things. So you're seeing this bridge of the organization says you need to do it, and then people who happen to be in this role also happen to do this thing. There's kind of a niche, there's a nice little come together there, and Stream's pretty good at that. So Stream's got some LMS function, some LXP function. So you can take some of the, if you're in this role, you need to do this thing, and some of the people who are interested in this skill are doing this thing and create that kind of unified record. So the LXP tends to come from an exploratory discovery kind of style of doing it. The LMS tends to come from you need to do this for this role. I'm sure there's lots of exceptions to that, but that's the middle bit. Matt, can the actor be overwhelmed by an automated system in the call center example? So they've specifically said not. So they have a specific window of time that training can be assigned, and you can't go beyond that. So once literally 20 minutes has lapsed, you're going to come out of that. So the training is all sized in that routine. There's some metadata that says, Matt has got 20 minutes. Give him this 10-minute bit of content. That should be fine. And then if you finish it early, we'll give you another one. And if you don't, you'll come back to the system. If you don't have enough time to complete the next one, you won't do it. And if you don't finish it, it will come back in next time you want to do it. So it's a really clever system, but it's all based on duration. So if you have 30 minutes, it will give you that much worth of content, or what it thinks is a decent guess of that much content. So hopefully you can't be kind of unproductive. It's a bit of a harsh way to think about it. But not doing the job you were doing for 16 hours because you get stuck on a video or something else like that. So, that's where I'm going there. Thank you for the questions. I really appreciate it. I'm running out of time and I don't want to take any of Peter's valuable time. So last piece for me is thinking a bit about whether or not your organization is ready for this stuff and where you are in this journey. So I have loads of conversations with people who say, this is fascinating, but my organization is nowhere near this and I don't know where to start or what I need to do. So we created a thing called the Learning Analytics Maturity Model based off a book by Donald Clark, who's one of our non-exec board members at Learning Pool. So Donald's written a book called Artificial Intelligence for Learning. And in it, he talks about this, which is a relatively standard schema for thinking about data, but he articulates it particularly well. And so what we think about is that organizations can be at one of 5 levels, from starting out to prescribing. And there's a kind of a staircase effect. So starting out, you're thinking about getting into data. At describing, you're able to accurately say what has happened using data. Analyzing, you're able to say why that's happened, not just what. At predicting, you're able to take the why it's happened to say what might happen given a set of circumstances in the future. And then if your predictions look accurate, you can start to prescribe. You can start to say, well, this is what I think we should do, given the data that we've seen in the past. And what the Learning Analytics Maturity Model does is a quick 10-minute diagnostic. You answer some questions, and then a couple of days later, we do everything by hand to check it's good. But we send you a PDF that says, hey, look, this is how you're doing, and this is where the organization is. And we base it against strategic buy-in, people and capabilities, market best practices, and tech. We focus a lot on tech, and obviously the xAPI cohort is predominantly focused around what people can do. But there's so much more to it in terms of, have you got leadership buy-in? Do you have the skills? And do you know what good looks like? So we start to measure all those things. And out the back of that, you get a nifty little 5-page PDF that says, this is where you're at in all of this area. This is what you might want to do next. This is where you need to improve. So do have a look at that URL. I'll put it in the chat for us after we're done. Free to take, no obligation, obviously. You just get a free report a couple of days' time. Takes about 10 minutes. Your organization needs to be over 250 people for it to work properly, or you go out to an audience that's bigger than 250 people. So if you're a smaller organization, but you often serve bigger audiences, then have one of those bigger audiences in mind when you think about it. Otherwise, the data is a little less reliable when it's a smaller organization. Last question, and then I'll hand back the mic. So thank you for listening to me this afternoon. I really appreciate it. What's the book again? AI for e-learning. Yeah, Artificial Intelligence for Learning. I will go and get you the link after this. But Jess, thank you for inviting me. It's been a great pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ben. I'm going to pass it over to Peter now, who's going to share some examples from a Watershed. So I'll pass the mic over to you, Peter.
Thanks, Jess. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. And thanks, Ben, for introducing and doing that amazing talk. I mean, we got the British takeover today. It's brilliant. So they were both on the same day. So yeah, my name's Peter. I work for a company called Watershed that probably quite a lot of you will have heard of. So Watershed are an LRS in some ways, but we are more focusing on kind of how do we aggregate and analyze the data that exists within not just the learning realm, but also the performance realm of organizations. Now, I've worked for Watershed for about kind of 2 years, but my background has been for kind of the past 5-6 years, actually more like 10 years actually now, thinking about it, is in learning. I previously worked for Leo, one of the largest kind of learning production companies in the world. I worked with the xAPI spec for quite a long time and helped write quite a few of the documents. But the interesting thing, and one of them as it came to Watershed, is this whole secondary part of it around the analytic part of what we're doing here. Now, we work with quite a lot of large organizations, and I'm going to go through a few of them today, but the main reason these organizations are coming to us is not that just they want to centralize their own data and everything else. But they want to do two things with it. They want to work out, why are people doing the learning they are doing, and what impact is that happening on the business? We talk about the return on expectation. There is an expectation that you are doing learning, you are developing learning programs, you are spending quite a lot of your organization's time and money. Well, actually, what return does that bring? And it's kind of hard to measure it as kind of dollars or pounds, but we were kind of looking at, well, we're trying to prove to the organization, well, you expect me to change things. Well, here are the things that we are changing. Now, to do that, of course, we do use a learning record store at the core of it all. We helped come up with the xAPI spec many years back, and the core of what we do is all xAPI based, but we don't just rely on kind of xAPI data. We also bring in data from lots of CSV systems. We have an all of kind of direct API integrations. We work with an awful lot of data sources. People like recently worked like Degreed, with Kaltura on Neuro, been working with Edcast. Quite a few organizations recently, and in the past, we've worked with probably about 30 or so organizations to help them implement not just xAPI, but good xAPI, as in xAPI that you can use and that you can use for analytics, that you can begin to use and prove that kind of that expectation of what's going on inside your business. And Ben briefly mentioned earlier on, the learning ecosystem, which is another thing that we've been looking at for a long time now. And we take an approach that, as Watershed, we want to be agnostic to your client data. So we will take data from any system. Even though we're part of a larger parent organization, we do work with all of those platforms, but we also work with our competitors' platforms. We also work with people who may directly compete with some of our organizations inside the group, so that we can provide the best data outcomes for the kind of business. Now, this is a very vague and massive diagram, and I'm not going to talk about that too much, but in reality, kind of what does one of our client ecosystems look like? And this is what I'm going to go into in more detail in a minute. But we find that people are buying Watersheds to, as Ben described earlier on, to act as the data layer of their learning ecosystem, but also to kind of connect it all together. We find we are not precious with our data. We have a great set of tools that let you export that data, send it out to other tools like your internal data lakes, get data from things like Workday and report back to your performance management systems, to look at kind of content platforms and that kind of thing, and just to really allow learning people to talk the data language that organizations are talking now, to allow them to kind of not just kind of graph the outcome and say, here is a table saying what we think we've changed in the business, but be able to provide that data upstream to other platforms, not just maybe BI tools, but also, as Ben was explaining, we've been looking at how do we work with kind of in the flow of business. We have a tool called Workflows that essentially says, in the same way as kind of Stream does, if this, then that. If this thing occurs, do this action. You could email somebody, but you could make an API call. You could enroll somebody into a course. You could do anything that essentially that API can connect to, which in the modern day is pretty much everything. And the reason we kind of, sorry, actually, I forgot where I was there for a second. The main kind of way we're doing that is that we see the LRS as more of a data lake. Sometimes we use the term data pond. It's a smaller data lake that feeds the larger data lakes in your organization with all of this kind of performance data and learning data and coaching information, everything else, so that then your business can apply machine learning to it and apply analytics to it. And this was one of the core bits of the xAPI spec. The first introduction paragraph of the xAPI specs says there is a need to analyze information about learning experiences and their outcomes across a wide source of platforms and technologies. And that's where we sit. We really take that to heart. We want you to be able to analyze that data and utilize that data in other places. So I'm going to talk through, hopefully, 3 client stories, but I've already spoken for 5 minutes, which is never a good sign, just around what people are doing with Watershed. And I've kind of put a focus on LXP, so that's what we're talking about today, but you'll see a kind of wider set of tools. So we've probably all seen Caterpillar diggers. Well, Caterpillar diggers are big, complicated tools that require an awful lot of learning, not just to use, but to sell and maintain. Some of these diggers nowadays, you may not know, have kind of 400 to 600 volt electrical systems inside them. Literally, you touch the wrong thing and you get fried to the floor straight away. So Caterpillar had a big problem that across their extended enterprise, they wanted to be able to prove who was using the learning, what they were doing, what was being utilized, but also as a kind of system of record, as a system of who is safe to be doing what we want to do, who's safe to be working on this. But then also provide that data and that learning to other systems. They have a massive extended enterprise. And the main thing that they were looking at is twofold, that they spend an awful lot of money on learning, want to prove the outcome. Secondly, we also want to see that we buy in all these tools and bits of data. Well, actually, is that useful? If we buy all of this video content, we make this video that costs $50,000, is anyone watching it? Is it worth spending that much money? Are we better off getting a guy with an iPhone to go and film a load of stuff? And that's a lot of the questions that they've been kind of asking recently. So not just looking at kind of what are people doing, but also, is our content worth it? Are the content integrations worth it? Are all these platforms we're buying worth it? I forgot to say at the beginning, but please ask any questions, and Jess and I'll get to them at the end. This is the big part of what I was saying there around, well, how are people relating to it? What is being used? If you're using, say, Question Mark or Open Sesame, an expensive tool, not only how people are using it, but also what are the outcomes to do with that? Are we getting more people certified in being able to fix X? Are we seeing less accidents in our dealerships? Are we seeing higher sales figures across regions who have higher learning? And to do that, they've utilized Watershed to basically have the data lake of learning that then is feeding upstream into their kind of, say upstream is a terrible business phrase, it's feeding their other data lakes, as I said, to kind of provide that learning information so that they can cross-reference it with those other bits of learning, things like the sales data and everything else. Yeah, I want to see that video too, Matt. It's quite scary. I've seen the batteries within them. They are bigger than me sometimes. It's worrying, really. So second use case here, and this goes even deeper into that kind of effectiveness kind of use case, is a company called Applied Industrial Technologies, sometimes called the biggest company you've never heard of. I've really heard it called. And essentially, they have a lot of dealers and companies around the world, around America mainly, who were doing a lot of learning around. They bought SAP and they were like, this cost us tens to hundreds of millions essentially to implement. Well then, and we put all this learning in place. Well, actually, is the learning effective? Are people using SAP properly, or are they not? Are we putting all this money into these tools and everything else, and people are not just utilizing them, or are they utilizing them badly? It's the kind of comprehension versus application argument, a classic impact analysis. A lot of the time they were looking at, well, people seem to be completing the learning fine, they seem to be getting to the end of it fine, but are they any better at what they do, really? Now, they really experimented with xAPI, and they didn't just implement xAPI into kind of their learning systems, but they have this enormous ecosystem centered around SAP and everything else, and xAPI apps and SCORM Cloud and SuccessFactors and everything else that kind of drew everything together into Watershed, reported upstream into SAP and everything else. But also, most importantly, they put learning into SAP, into the Jam product they have there. But they also had SAP Jam report out what were people doing. Were people any better at X? Were people utilizing these products well? Were they increasing their skills? Were they increasing their kind of competencies in certain areas? Or was just nobody interacting with this stuff? And they kind of, I haven't got the original slide here, but they went from having these enormous spreadsheets and pivot tables and all the horrible other things you do in Excel to simply looking at, well, can we simplify these down into competencies, into a classic kind of spider diagram? Where are you sat? Where are teams of people sat? Where are people sat? And then how does that fit against kind of not just your role, but the rest of the business as a benchmark? Are you any better for doing learning? Is the business any better for spending all of this money and time and effort into doing everything? And there's some really great videos on our site, you can see about this. A guy called Andy Webb, he's a wonderful guy. Lots of people probably heard speak, who kind of talks passionately about how this really changed the kind of learning and the thinking of learning, not just the thinking of learning, but how people thought about learning in the business. He's simply being able to quickly provide visualizations on not just how well are people doing, but or how many courses they're completing, but also how is that changing your bottom line? How is that changing the amount of money you, your department, and the company are making? Then the last one I'll go through before we go to kind of questions is one of my favorites because it's a really interesting use case. About 5 years ago, Visa really decided to take on board xAPI. They were rebuilding their learning ecosystem. They started off building this quite, I say basic, it's kind of 6-7 tools connected up to an LRS. It's not basic, but they started off with buying PathGather and LXP and connecting up their LMS and things like SurveyMonkey and Get Abstract and all kinds of other tools that provide not just xAPI data, but learning data up to an LRS, and going, yeah, we want to centralize all of this data. And it's a really good case of actually breaking down the silos of data we have in L&D. We are terrible, as Ben said, there are 24 systems in each company, and half of them don't talk to each other. They've all got different reporting requirements and abilities. Half the time they report in different methods. One will give you a CSV file. One's got some JSON backend that you can query. One only allows you to get aggregate analysis and everything else. So they went, that's not good enough. We want all of our learning data to be in a common format and a common place. xAPI, the classic use of it, get data from disparate systems, normalize it and put it in one location so it can be reported and analyzed upon. And yeah, they went really far on this. In fact, they went to the point of actually going, well, these tools don't provide xAPI data, but we really want to use them. And so they've built custom connectors and things like that that take the CSV or the reporting data out and actually then ship it into Watershed as an xAPI statement. Now, kind of 4 or 5 years later, they've massively expanded this ecosystem. But in doing so, they did two things that traditionally is really hard in L&D, but the LRS made it easy. They replaced their LMS and their LXP. They essentially completely got rid of the original LMS and then went to a new one. Suddenly they were like, well, we don't have to worry about all of this reporting data as such. It's already centralized. It's already in our LRS. We can report on it. We can send it upstream to Tableau. Then actually that migration isn't as scary. We don't have to suddenly get this 5-6 years of historical data and migrate it over. We already have it in a good place. We're good at that. And then secondly, then they went, well, actually that wasn't too bad. Well, they're kind of forced into it because Degreed bought PathGather. They were like, well, okay, we have to go and use Degreed. And what they actually did is they worked with us to go to Degreed and actually build up a native xAPI implementation that was as good as PathGather's to allow them to get that data. And they're shipping kind of hundreds of thousands, up to probably 500,000 statements a day often out of Degreed for all these learning experiences. And they've actually gone from PathGather to Degreed and suddenly gone, well, that wasn't that painful again. We've gone from having kind of the 20-30 million or so statements they had in the previous system from PathGather, and then just added the Degreed ones on top. There are some functionalities in Watershed that allow them to do that. We have abilities to do like equivalencies and that kind of thing that made that really easy. But yeah, having it all in that one location meant that wasn't that painful. There's some other quite interesting things they do that's really useful. We talked about vendor utilization earlier on. Well, xAPI allows them to quite quickly see that something like Better Up was suddenly stopped being used. People didn't like it. They're like, well, we'll get rid of that contract. We'll get a new system, one that works better, one that simply lets us do these things in a much better way. The LRS lets them have compliance learning in the LXP that sat in 5 or 6, 7 different systems and have a compliance dashboard that simply says, yeah, here's the percentage completion of our organization who've completed this stuff. They're working in finance. There's massive compliance requirements. Well, they can then just share that dashboard with the team and whoever else needs to see it and that kind of thing. And then kind of lastly, the really big one that they've kind of focused on a lot more recently, and we haven't spoken about too much, and well, Ben did mention it actually, was content. Well, they have all of this platform data. Well, do they have their kind of experience data at the low level? Yeah, they've really kind of gotten into actually going, well, all of our learning we are being built has to have actionable insights from it. It's no good it's just shipping xAPI data, but we're able to say this thing, this piece of learning we've done relates to this product, which then when they look at when they do the analytics around how well are people selling that product, well then does doing learning in this specific product affect the sales figures? And they're actually tracking that quite nicely at the moment. They're beginning to see actually, yeah, if we do really detailed, expensive learning interventions on these people, we do see better impact. And it's done in quite a basic way. Essentially, it's just using canonical statements and extensions to kind of go, well, this relates to this and this relates to this and everything else. So they don't necessarily need to build the learning to support it. They just need to be able to report on it inside the LRS. So now I've spoken about this for quite a while, and there's a couple of questions just to kind of look at. So, Dave was saying, your example case about when data visualizations that communicate, let's say, achieving the competencies of your users. Yeah, we have the ability to use things like spider diagrams to say, essentially, this statement or this collection of statements, so you have to do this 10 times or 20 times, or we have to see this 15 times in the LRS. That can actually then relate to a branch on the spider diagram saying, actually, you've met that 5 times, therefore you're above the kind of requirement you have. And that doesn't just have to be learning things. We find people like Applied are also taking you've done these things in real life, they're in the LRS, therefore we can report on them. It's not just you've done the learning, but you've also demonstrated that in a real situation. There are other examples as well that we're working around, kind of call centers and things and that kind of talking about, well, you have used the right wordage, the right verbiage on calls, therefore actually the training is working. You are using better positive language or not, or using the right kind of language in that kind of situation as well. Matt saying, is there any verb training for Visa? Yeah, they have quite a bit themselves. They use various tools, and actually we spent quite a lot of time with their internal teams training them in actually developing content for xAPI, things, even Storyline, these things like Gomo as well, just to kind of go, well, actually, here is your ability to build custom content in that. Here's your best practices in xAPI. It's not just that then, but it's also looking at they don't just use content in the traditional sense, these things like microsites and things like that. There are kind of little learning experiences buried inside kind of SharePoint and other internal tools as well that report back to the LRS. Bradley, yeah, we do kind of help certain organizations with ecosystems. We also have our we work by hard with a much bigger group called Learning Technologies Group. We have sister companies called Leo and things who do a lot of work in kind of developing and consulting around learning ecosystems, but we work with them as well to kind of build up those back ends to them as well. I think that's the last of the questions there. Any more, please just get in touch with me and yeah, fire them over and I'll answer as many as I can. Thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you so much, Peter. All right, we're gonna hop back into our team check-ins. I'll use GitHub. So I'm gonna share my screen now. I have the folks who said that they were going to share out for their teams. I also have the list of teams who have updates that have already been shared on GitHub. So up first, we have Team Early Childhood Education, and Joanne is on the line but unable to share her update. So the general update is they're continuing to explore standards and verbs related to nature play. And one of the things that they're asking folks for support this week is to review and give feedback to the posted materials. So you can see in their GitHub, they have some posted materials and they would like some folks to just review this content and offer some feedback. The next team that we're going to share out is Jim with Team HR Open Standards, and up on deck is going to be Brian Duck with Team Makey Makey.
Thank you, Jess.
No problem.
Great job today. So for Team HR Open Standards, we've got our GitHub all set up. We've got our first use case developed. It's all written up. We'll be reviewing it tomorrow as a team. Our second use case, which is related to individual learning records and individual learning lockers or wallets, will be worked on later today, and should also be reviewed by the team tomorrow at our weekly 10 a.m. meeting. Of course, the meeting is open. The Zoom links in our Slack channel, and anybody's welcome to join. But that's our update. We're progressing very nicely.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jim.
You're welcome.
So up next, we have Team Makey, and Brian, we have you giving that update, and on deck will be Team Zoom with Brian Wanser. Are you there, Brian Duck? All right. So their update for Team Makey is that they did a walkthrough with the project and did an overview with folks who are interested in participating. They did a code review and they're hoping to accomplish in the next week to publish the walkthrough and the other recordings on a YouTube channel. And then that'll be linked to the Makey GitHub. So if you're interested in using and learning about launching a prototype app for using Makey to send xAPI statements, you can join that team in Slack. You can also talk to Brian Duck or anyone in Slack about this team. So the next team that we're going to have share out is Team Zoom, and I believe Brian Wanser is on the line. Brian, if you're here to give the update.
I am. Hi, Jess.
Hello. Go ahead.
So this week we were exploring the API possibilities within Zoom and the limitations for what kind of data that we could get. We're looking at hopefully sending some statements around how engaged someone was in a Zoom meeting. So we figured out that we can get poll results from a Zoom meeting and also when users shared their screen in the meeting, which is kind of interesting. And then we'll also be using the recording functionality to get the chat in meeting chat transcript, and then also the audio transcript. It writes down exactly what everyone said. So we're hoping to use that information, and especially the timestamps within that, to see how active somebody was in speaking in the meeting. And then next for us, we're looking at, once we get all of that information coming in, how we can parse that data out from the API and then be able to craft statements from that.
Awesome. Thank you for that update, Brian. And the final team that we have an update for is Team Storyline Engagement, but I don't think anyone is on the line that can give that update. So their accomplishments for this week is they met with Jason Hagg to set up a Veracity LRS for the team. They're continuing to move forward with their learning, and what they hope to accomplish in the next week is to start sharing statements and feedback on how to get started for the new members. So if you're interested in integrating xAPI into Storyline to generate data on learner engagement, whether it be time spent on slides, in the modules, the media, etc., feel free to join Team Storyline Engagement. And that is all of the teams that we have updates for this week. So just want to remind everyone that our cohort meetings are weekly at 2:00 p.m. Eastern. We have another set of case studies next week with Art Workington, who's going to share over some of those case studies. So if you're interested in learning more about real life case uses for xAPI and want to learn, come on through. We also have our xAPI party on December 11th. It is fully online. You can register as a participant on our website. And then you can submit a proposal to present. This link to the proposal submission is always sent in the weekly update. So you can get that, and it was just put in the main channel of Slack by Megan. As always, if you have any questions or anything, you can email me or message me in Slack. With that, continue to go out there and make things using xAPI, and have a awesome Thursday. and rest of the week.